All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about boys and men who are experiencing domestic violence because it does happen. It happens all the time, all around us, but you probably don't hear it as much, honestly. So we are just going to go ahead and jump right on in. I'm going to present the slideshow. There we go. So just, real quickly, if you see anything that's interesting to you, I know this is recorded, but still, I would love for, in the comments on YouTube to ask questions or just throw out any ideas or any thoughts that you have during this presentation. That would be great. So we're just going to hop right on in. This is all about boys and men. Let's see. Here we go. All right, so I really like this quote. It says, "Trauma is a fact of life. It does not, however, have to be a life sentence." So, trauma, it's happening all around us. People are experiencing it every day in different types of ways. But, we have to kind of learn how to work with it and deal with it and learn how to thrive after trauma, even though it can be very hard. So, it doesn't have to be a life sentence. There are ways to deal with it and cope with it. And then we are going to kind of look at each of these different pieces. So we'll look at some statistics. What does domestic violence look like for men? And then, the reporting aspect of it, and we'll kind of dive into each of those a little bit. So to start with some statistics, we have, roughly, very loosely, 1 in 9 men experience extreme intimate partner violence, contact sexual violence, or stalking, or all of these together at one time. And about 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical abuse or physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. So, when I say know the facts or know the statistics, you kind of do have to take it with a grain of salt because, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, what does the reporting look like? Is the reporting accurate? So every time you see a statistic, especially when it comes to men experiencing domestic violence, you have to remember that these are statistics that are being reported. And how much reporting is actually happening because there are so many stigmas, which we will talk about. So I do have a little video I want to play, and this is kind of just, giving men their voice and speak out about their experiences. So we will just sit back and listen.
Domestic violence victims suffer in silence, feeling like they can't come forward. And this can be especially true for men in these types of relationships. ABC4's Caleb Aggerly looked into how changing the narrative will help many of them speak up and report it.
Male victims of domestic violence may feel like they can't talk about what they are going through behind closed doors. Experts say they may be afraid to reach out for help because they feel shame or are worried they will be judged.
You were just berated, belittled, put down, degraded.
1 in 2 women will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime, and 1 in 4 men.
And those numbers could be underreported.
Men hesitate to report it simply because, we all perceive men as being these strong male folks. And if you're involved in a domestic violence, they don't want people to view them as being weak. And it's really not weak.
2 months ago, professional bull rider Demetrius Omar Latif Allen, also known as Ouncy, was killed in what police are calling a domestic violence homicide after he came to Salt Lake City to compete in the Utah State Fair.
To know Ouncy was genuinely, truly to love him.
LaShawn Denise Bagley, who police say had an on and off relationship with Allen, was arrested for investigation of murder and felony discharge of a firearm. Allen's family says that he was a great light in their lives, and the loss has been extremely difficult.
It's like I'm still in a dream, and I just want to wake up and have him back. It just doesn't seem real to refer to him in past tense.
A man who wishes to remain anonymous shared his story with ABC4 about how he felt abused emotionally and physically and controlled for over a decade of marriage.
And behind closed doors, you have no idea what can happen.
He says he constantly hoped his relationship would improve, but it did not.
And my normal became daily more and more unnormal.
He describes that he was kept away from his family and did not feel like he could tell anyone about what he was going through.
To explain what it is I'm in, I just didn't want to do it. I couldn't do it. I was shell-shocked.
And that he could never imagine he would experience what he did.
I was walking on pins and needles, on absolute broken glass. I couldn't keep my mind straight.
And eventually the abuse put him in the hospital.
She hit me so hard that it knocked the wind out of me.
The mental abuse also took its toll.
My soul was ripped from me.
But he said men may feel like they won't be believed or they might be trivialized, which is why it can be difficult for them to come forward.
When do you ever hear about that woman that screams and yells to where that man is deaf? Well, you don't.
Jennifer Campbell, the executive director with the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition, says men might feel uneasy about reporting if they're experiencing abuse due to stigmas.
Assuming that it's just one type or one area is actually really dangerous in our narrative as a community, because it limits people's understanding of what they could do to help.
She says in order to support victims of domestic violence, we need to listen and believe them.
That there are people that are here to help you. They're trained professionals that recognize that domestic violence does impact men.
More attention to it.
Salt Lake County Sheriff Rosie Rivera says we need to take a look at harmful biases that could stop men from getting the help they need.
This came up when Ouncey Mitchell was killed. I had a lot of media calling and people calling me and saying, but that doesn't happen. Men aren't victims, but men are victims.
Our anonymous source says it isn't easy to come forward, but he hopes others do, so they are able to get the support they need and to get out of the abusive relationship.
You put your foot down and say, this is enough. I've hit my brink. I can't do this anymore. Speak up about it and get out of it.
If you or someone you know may be a victim of domestic abuse, call the hotline you see on the screen behind me.
Okay, so some points that I definitely want to share that kind of stand with me from that presentation. He mentioned that his wife of over 10 years was abusing him, and the mental and the physical abuse. You'll often see those two things go hand in hand, right? So if someone is being physically abusive towards you, of course that's going to kind of mess with your head, and it's going to mentally and emotionally impact you and affect you. So you're going to have a lot of different types of abuse that are happening intertwined with each other, and that's with everyone. It's very rare that you just have someone say, well, I was physically abused. Okay, so how did that affect you mentally, and how did that affect you emotionally? Because they tie together. But also he mentioned that, she eventually kept him away from his family and friends, and you will see that in pretty much every form of abuse as well. That's an isolation tactic. So an abuser is going to want to keep you away from people that you can depend on, and your interests and your hobbies and your safe spaces and safe people to go to, because, well, if they're out of the question and they're not around anymore, then you have to depend on your abuser. You have no one else, no one left to turn to. So that isolation piece happens also with men. And then, the feeling of walking on pins and needles or tiptoeing around eggshells, like things, like that are kind of little warning signs in your brain. If you're scared to bring up topics to your partner because of how they'll react, or you're scared to say a certain thing because it might just be the tipping point of the day and set them off into their cycle of abuse, that's definitely a red flag. And it all happens to men as well. And he did mention, getting screamed at to the point of losing hearing. So women have their ways of being abusers as well. And that's kind of the point of, this presentation, is to kind of give men their voices back and, let them know that we hear you and we're here for you, and you're experiencing these things too. And so, we have this issue of men experiencing domestic violence and underreporting, and maybe why was this stuff being underreported. When you sit back and take a second to think about, all the things that you hear your friends or you heard yourself growing up about, just be a man or just tough through it. It's like, well, it kind of makes sense as to why men have this stigma to just tough through it and deal with it themselves. So these are some toxic phrases that are commonly said to boys as they're growing up, and they hear these things and they internalize it. And it kind of comes back to a toxic masculinity thing. It's like this mask that they have to wear and that they have to carry. So you'll hear things like, well, you're being too sensitive. This can cause shame. The child will feel shame for the emotions that they're experiencing. Well, if I'm being too sensitive, I shouldn't show that. Or if that's being pointed out, then that's a wrong emotion to have, for my feelings to be hurt. So it invalidates their experiences and what they're feeling. And a lot of times this results in suppression of the emotions. Well, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to bury it down, deal with it behind closed doors, and put on that mask of masculinity that everything's fine. I don't cry. I don't get upset. I don't have emotions, that kind of a thing. Boys don't cry. This is showing, men and young boys that crying is a sign of weakness, and only females do that, which is dangerous for both men and females. And then this causes, a lot of times you hear the anger is, that secondary emotion. There's a deeper emotion. So this will cause anger to be the more commonly demonstrated emotion, because if I can't cry, I'm going to find a different way to show what I'm experiencing without tears. I'm going to get angry. Um, Saying things like those are for girls. This causes, young boys to stray from exploring their natural instincts. And then emotional distancing with certain, interests and things that they are interested in naturally. And why can't you be more like whoever? Why can't you be more like your brother Joe? Or why can't you be more like whatever stand-up man in the community? This is definitely harmful to a child's self-esteem. This will cause them to feel depressed and feeling like, well, I've failed. Being me isn't good enough because I'm not being more like someone who's doing better. And then we have some more. It kind of just goes on. These are just some of the things. I'm sure you can think of some things that you've heard. Maybe you've even accidentally said these things and you don't realize the impact it's having on our boys. But things like you play like a girl sends a message that females and girls are less than. They're not as good as males. Gives them permission to view females as unworthy, and it leads to a sense of entitlement. And then you must win, having that, go, 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 get the trophy, winner mentality. This kind of demonstrates or shows, men that you need to be focused on the prize and focused on, the award instead of focused on the game itself and the whole experience as a whole. And it also kind of gives that mentality of failure is not an option. So, when men aren't as forthcoming about failures in their day, well, we wonder why, because of, something's gone terribly wrong at work. Well, they failed at that. They didn't get the prize of the day. And then, of course, the infamous boys will be boys phrase that we all have heard. So, maybe even said. Even if you're not a boy, you've heard this being said. So this kind of allows for boys to not take responsibility for their actions, and gives them that leeway. Well, I'm just a boy, or boys do this, boys act this way. And then it demonstrates that men and boys can't help themselves. It's just an impulse, and well, we can't help it. So it's giving them that excuse. Which is very dangerous. And all of these might seem like an innocent thing that you would say to a child. But you really have to think about, if you're saying these things often and they're hearing this and they soak it up like sponges, they carry this with them throughout their lives. So, what kind of mentality are we expecting our boys to have? Because we're training them as boys to become men, and what they learn in their childhood, they're going to carry into being a teen, and especially what they learn and what they practice as a teen in regards to themselves or relationships, they carry that into adulthood heavily, and it's hard to unlearn bad habits and bad mentality, as an adult when that's all you've ever known. And so I did mention toxic masculinity earlier. And this is kind of just breaking that stigma that men are naturally violent. You know, men aren't naturally violent. And so our culture, we associate masculinity with that strength and that physical power. So we're going to talk about this and kind of hear what they have to say a little bit more.
Instead of just asking, how can we make Sarah's wrist better? At MedStar Health, we ask, how can we better?
What is toxic masculinity? Everything you need to know. Toxic masculinity is a popular term used nowadays to describe the behavior of men that are problematic. While it may sound demeaning to men, toxic masculinity does not criticize masculinity itself. Instead, it refers to the adherence men may have to societal standards for masculinity that can prove to be harmful to men and society as well. Masculinity is not inherently a problem in society. However, what is expected from it can lead to the development of such elements. Common traits. Toxic masculinity exhibits traits that are characteristic to men, such as 1. Aggression, 2. Being stoic, 3. Physical and mental toughness, 4. Emotional insensitivity, 5. Self-sufficiency, 6. Discrimination against everything not heterosexual. Men displaying affection or sensitivity is taken as a sign of them having homosexual tendencies. This goes against society's expectations of men being attracted to straight, cisgender women only, which propagates heterosexism in men. Another common phrase is, "I'm a guy, what do you expect?" Used in conjunction with the perceived social norms and roles that men are expected to adhere to, this phrase is essentially a justification of actions that are in line with toxic masculinity. Men are supposed to own up to how society expects them to act. What causes it? Toxic masculinity is not inherent to men. It is not genetic. A single cause for it cannot be pinpointed, since it has to do with the societal perception of men. The perception has been developed over millennia and has been influenced by culture, religion, and economic conditions. Moreover, it can vary across age groups and can also show differences according to classes. However, all experts agree that society reinforces and nurtures toxic masculinity. Several studies have discussed the negative effects of toxic masculinity on a man's health. While it is commonly seen as harmful to others, men face real harm because of it. Adhering to it is believed to affect the physical and mental health of men. It can result in depression and poor sleep. Men are less likely to seek problems for both physical and mental issues because they do not want to be seen as weak by society. Impact on society. The effects of toxic masculinity on society are widely studied and reported. It is strongly believed to enforce rape culture. The aggression attributed to toxic masculinity is also believed to be responsible for violence in society. As men do not seek help for their problems, they often end up isolating or excluding themselves. How to address it? Addressing toxic masculinity means realizing its negative effect on society and confronting it. Men must recognize that it's all right for them to show sensitivity and not be constrained by traditional societal norms. Men need to be okay with who they are, ready to have the tough conversations that can help them confront toxic masculinity. After that, it's all about doing the work.
So here, the biggest takeaway is that, that toxic masculinity that men are kind of, felt to be forced to embody is dangerous. It puts on those, dangerous expectations, on themselves and how to act. And then we wonder why things like domestic violence go underreported. Because, like I said at the beginning, you're taught to just be a man, be tough, be strong, have power over the situation. You should be more physically powerful in the relationship. So why are you letting her hit you? Things like that. That are very dangerous to our men. So here's just a good quote that I like. Toxic masculinity is a narrow and repressive description of manhood, designating manhood as defined by violence, sex status, and aggression. It's the cultural ideal of manliness, where strength is everything while emotions are weakness, where sex and brutality are yardsticks by which men are measured, while supposedly feminine traits, which can range from emotional vulnerability to simply not being hypersexual, are means by which your status as a man can be taken away. So that is from the Good Men Project. I just like that quote because it kind of just breaks it down into layman's terms, really, into how that can, probably feels for men. And so all of this kind of brings us back to begging the question, well, are the statistics really accurate then? And so that's kind of something that we definitely need to keep in our mind because, when you hear domestic violence and you hear sexual assault and all these things, I'm sure that a lot of us in our brains, we immediately think, okay, there's a female who's in trouble, or there's a female who's been abused, and there's a male perpetrator. That's just because of how we've been, socially wired and taught over the time. And, we'll look at the statistics. Women are more likely to be abused. We just immediately put females as the victim and males as the perpetrator, when really that's not what we should be doing. So, because men feel that pressure to be the strong male and not ask for help. Males also face discrimination from police, shelters, and public opinion. So, a lot of men have nowhere to go, especially, for domestic violence situations. If a male is fleeing a domestic violence situation, looking for shelters it's very, very hard, and it's very thin, and non-existent in many, many places. And especially if there's a man who is looking for shelter and they also have children, that's, pretty much they're set up for failure. And then discrimination from police. So again, we all kind of have that idea of what domestic violence is and who it affects and how it affects people. So there's discrimination in everything, and even public opinion, which is scary. So that's, what we're hoping to kind of try to just put the conversation out there and break these stigmas. And so here are some types of abuse. Now these, abuse doesn't change from male to female. Any abuse that a female can experience, a male can experience it in the same way. They can experience it in a worse way. Abuse is abuse is abuse, no matter who it is towards. So you have verbal and emotional abuse, degrading, gaslighting, even the silent treatment. That is a form of verbal and emotional abuse. If someone you're in a relationship and all of a sudden they just stop talking to you for the day, it leaves you wondering, what did I do wrong? Or it starts to make you self-blame, which is a tactic of abuse. And then stalking. So this one's huge, and this is one that a lot of women use towards men, tracking locations, stalking social media, physically following them places, having to know where they're at, who they're with, who are they talking to all the time. Of course, there's physical abuse, so shoving, slapping, throwing objects at the victim, use of weapons. And that's one that I like to talk about too, the throwing objects at a victim. So maybe, there are two people and they're in an altercation, and a heavy water jug is thrown at another. Maybe it didn't hit them, but that's still a form of abuse. It's used as a as a fear tactic. I can hit you with this and I might decide to miss you this time, but next time I'm going to hit you and it's going to cause harm. Threats. So this one's huge. This one's huge with men. I mean, it happens with women too, but this one's huge, especially when you're thinking of threat towards or using children. So if you leave me, I'm going to take the kids, or I'm going to have custody of the kids because, well, they always believe the woman. Nobody's going to believe you, things like that. So that causes men to be afraid of losing their children. So, okay, well, if I leave my abusive partner, well, she's taking the kids and I'm probably never going to see them again. So that, causes them to just stay in their situation so that way they can stay with their kids, even pets and other family members. So threats can be made, animal abuse, and then threats towards family members. sexual coercion, so withholding sex as a form of control, tampering with birth control methods, and protection, that is sexual coercion, intentionally, not taking birth control, poking holes in condoms, all of those things are forms, types of abuse that are used to maintain that power and control because, well, if you have a baby together, then in some way, shape, or form, you're in a way tied to that person for at least, X amount of years. And then, of course, isolation. So, forbidding the victim to leave the house, have friends, have a job, go to school, make their own income, that kind of a thing is huge, and that's very hard to detect because a lot of abusers will kind of disguise this as, well, I'm just looking out for you. I'm just trying to make sure that you're safe, or I'm just trying to make sure that the friends that you have are really your true friends. When really a lot of times, isolation is a very hard thing to pinpoint until it's too late. And then financial control. So demanding money, restricting how the victim spends their money or gets their money, mismanaging their money on purpose, ruining their credit, things like that are all types of financial control. And so, kind of talking about, the different types of abuse, what's the difference between men and women experiencing abuse? And really there is none. Men can experience the same exact thing. The biggest difference is that they're less likely to report it and seek assistance because of the stigma around men facing violence. And sometimes, honestly, it's difficult for men to realize or identify that what they're experiencing is abuse, because they were raised, we'll just tough it out, be strong, get through it. They're like, okay, well, if I learned that at a young age, this must be normal behavior, when it's not. And so we're going to listen to this specific story from a survivor himself.
He was stabbed, burnt, made to sleep on the floor and cut off from his family. All this by his controlling girlfriend. Well, now Alex Gill has decided to talk about his ordeal after she was jailed for 7.5 years. 22-year-old Jordan Worth pleaded guilty to grievous bodily harm and coercive controlling behaviour. She subjected Alex to mental and physical abuse for several years. Well, Alex joined me in the studio a little earlier, and I began by asking him why he made the brave decision to speak out.
I want to use the experiences I went through to help professionals and help everyone come together and help people that are in the situation now, hopefully watching this on the telly, and to come out and say, yeah, I've been abused, and they can seek the help that I got.
So talk us through the start of your relationship then. Were there any signs at all of the abuse or what she was like?
Not at the beginning, no. It was fairly normal. It was fine. And then we went on a holiday to London, just a little break, and then there was another holiday we went to Egypt. On both occasions, she disappeared. And she did it to just muck with my head.
So for you, that was a sign of the mental abuse? That was a start?
Yeah.
And how did it start to escalate? When did it start to escalate?
Well, I moved in with her parents, and she'd just take me to work late and all sorts of things like that, just to muck with my mind, so I got into trouble with people. And then she, there was one particular time she said that her mum got a message and that my granddad had died. And I was crying for a good 2 hours. Yeah, I was just absolutely devastated. About half an hour after that, she said, oh, I was lying. So I spent 2 hours thinking that I lost my granddad, and then finding out that he was actually alive, and it was just such a weird, well, it just mucked with my head completely.
So it starts from these mental games, as you put it, and then slowly she starts becoming more controlling, isolating you from your friends and family.
Yeah, because when I moved into her parents, and she sort of let me have a phone then. I had a phone, but I couldn't contact any of my family or friends that are from where I was from. And then we moved out to Stewartby, into our own place, and then it got worse and just kept developing more and more of the mental, and then the physical violence started then.
How did that start exactly?
I can't really explain it. She just flipped one night because I didn't do what she would want me to do, and I wasn't doing the right thing in her mind, and she lay in the bed with a Desperados bottle and basically hit me on the head when I fell asleep. And when I managed to get rid of that, she then got a hammer, started to do it with a hammer, and after about a few weeks I managed to run out of the house with the hammer and throw it in the field opposite. Basically, anything that I got rid of should find something new, so it went from bottle to hammer to bits of wood, plastic, like a plastic football pole with the spike on the end, and it was snapped, so the other end was jagged as well, and she'd try and stab me with that. Then it went to knives, and then it went to right near the end with boiling water.
So throughout this time, you're going through this incredible abuse, and you don't say anything. You're not saying anything.
No.
Why is that?
Well, she did say that if I was to say anything, she would kill me, or that my life would be completely ruined. And I didn't really know what to do. Neighbours sort of questioned it when I walked in the house, said, "Look, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I just had a moment." She goes, "Are you sure it's you having a moment?" And I said, "Yeah, it was me, it was me." But they knew for quite a while. They rang the police quite often, and the police come out quite a lot.
So talk us through the moment you finally spoke out.
Yeah, it was a week later, so the 10th, so the Saturday after this incident happened, and I got a knock on the door, and it was the same police officer, Ed Finn, and he goes, "Hello, mate." I was like, "Oh, hello." And thinking back, at that moment, he said, "Hello, mate," the way he did, I knew at that point that was it, it was done. But it took him a lot of time to persuade me to say it, because he went upstairs and he said, "Look, we see stab wounds a lot. This isn't you doing it, this is defensive injuries. We can clearly tell that you've tried to protect yourself, it's so obvious." I said, no, it's not that, it's not that. He got me in the police car and locked me in the police car, and he said, "Now you're going to tell me, I'm not going anywhere until you tell me." I said, "No, honestly, I'm telling you the truth." He goes, "You're not looking me in the eye, you're lying." I said, "I'm not lying." He goes, "You are." And he switched his body camera off, and then he asked me again. And straight away I said, "Yeah, she's been doing it, but can you just say it's from the neighbours? Because I don't want her." Because at that point I was still quite scared, but as soon as I was taken away from that environment, it was a massive, massive relief.
So it's gone through court. She's now been jailed for 7.5 years. Have you had any word from her? Have you spoken to her? Has she said why she did this?
No. There's been no explanation at all, no.
It's all about your future then. What are you looking towards?
I hopefully want to start a charity up for abused men to help them get out of the situation, or to help them recover if they had got out of the situation. And I just want to help people to speak out, to make it feel comfortable. I've done it and I'm in a far better place. If you don't talk about it, you're never going to get to that far better place. So at least give yourself a chance.
Alex Gill speaking to me a little bit earlier.
So you can kind of hear, the fear in his voice and still the trauma that he has, speaking of it. But how much power and control she had over him. I mean, it took not just him being in a different room, or not just him being outside, and not even him just sitting in a police car, right? It took him being in a police car, completely removed from the house where they were staying together, and with the body camera switched off, for him to tell what was going on, because that was the level of fear that he had. And so all of those things, which were hard to hear, physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, she was taking him to, he probably didn't have access to a vehicle. So she was driving him to work, making him late on purpose. Another way to control, because eventually, you're going to be reprimanded, get fired, then you're not going to have a job anymore. So the isolation piece, the emotional abuse that she would use as well, all of those things can happen to men just like they do with women. And so that was the main takeaway and he mentioned that, speaking up, he's better for it. And that, helped him in his healing journey. So that's kind of what we're hoping to, inspire here and kind of take away that stigma, like I said. And so this, A Call to Men is a great resource for men to have or kind of browse through and look at. So this is a CEO in a quote. It says, if you are teaching young men and boys the qualities of healthy manhood, you are teaching them to support body autonomy for women. So it's kind of a win-win situation. Teaching at a young age, modeling healthy behaviors and healthy expectations and relationships, but even how to be healthy with yourself, and your own mind and how you view yourself and, speaking out for yourself. So it goes a long way. And I think it really does start with our youth. So these are some great resources that I kind of like to throw out. Domesticshelters.org has tons and tons of articles that you can go to and explore, just to kind of learn a little bit more, research, or just, read common stories. And then Engaging Men and A Call to Men. Both of those are great organizations and websites that you can go to for more reading. And then, of course, our website has everything about who we are. Our nonprofit here in Waldorf, Maryland, our counseling services that we provide for men and women, and just all the different resources that are out there for you. It's endless, really. So this was kind of just an educational piece to hopefully spread the awareness and keep the topic going so that we can continue to support our men and boys. Stop recording.